Before I begin, I can write this in a serious Catholic theological reflection style with a contemplative, authoritative tone, inspired by the kind of themes often discussed by Fr Chad Ripperger, but I won't claim to be writing as him or exactly replicate his personal voice. I'll preserve the spiritual message while making it an original YouTube script. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself why, despite achieving what the world calls success, something inside you still feels restless? Why, after years of working, earning, achieving, and trying to build security, there remains a quiet emptiness that money, positions, and human approval cannot fill? There comes a moment in every person's life when God begins to reveal a deeper truth. Your identity was never meant to be built upon a title, a paycheck, or the acceptance of a human system. The world teaches us from an early age that our value is measured by what we do, where we work, how much we earn, and how others recognize us. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. God does not first ask, "What position do you hold?" He asks, "Who are you in relation to me? Are you living according to the purpose for which I created you?" Because there is a danger in allowing employment, possessions, and worldly structures to become the foundation of our hope. When those things become the source of our identity, we slowly begin to serve them instead of allowing them to serve their proper purpose. Many people spend their entire lives searching for security through human systems.
They wake up every morning carrying the burden of maintaining their position, pleasing their employer, protecting their income, and proving their worth. They live with the constant fear that one decision from another person could change everything. A company can restructure, a position can disappear.
An employer can replace someone, an economy can shift overnight. Yet many people place their entire peace and confidence in things that were never designed to provide eternal security. God is reminding you today that your ultimate source does not come from a company, a manager, or a salary. Your ultimate source comes from Him. This does not mean that work itself is wrong. Work is not a punishment. Work was present even before the fall of humanity. Scripture shows us that man was placed in the garden to cultivate it, to care for it, and to exercise responsibility over creation. Labor has dignity when it is connected to the purpose God established. But there is a difference between meaningful work and becoming enslaved to a system that controls your entire sense of worth. The problem is not work. The problem is when work becomes your master. The problem is when you begin to believe that without a certain position, without a certain income, or without a certain person's approval, you have no value. God is calling you away from that mindset. He is not calling you into laziness. He is not telling you to abandon responsibility. He is not saying that effort, discipline, and commitment are unnecessary. Rather, He is calling you to examine where your trust truly rests. Are you trusting God as your provider, or are you trusting only in the temporary instruments He may use to provide? There is a difference. A person who trusts only in a job lives with constant anxiety because they know the job can disappear. But a person who trusts in God understands that even when one door closes, God is not limited. The source remains even if the method changes. Think about the many times throughout Scripture when God provided in ways people could not have predicted. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they did not survive because they had access to human systems of supply. They survived because God sustained them. When the prophet Elijah had no ordinary means of support, God provided through unexpected circumstances. When a widow had almost nothing left, God multiplied what appeared insignificant. These stories are not merely ancient accounts. They reveal something about the nature of God. They show that God is not controlled by circumstances. He is not limited by economies, governments, markets, or human decisions. Yet many people struggle because they have been trained to believe that security can only come through what they can see. They want a guaranteed paycheck. They want predictable outcomes. They want complete control over the future. But faith requires something deeper. Faith requires trusting that God sees what we cannot see. Faith requires believing that His wisdom is greater than our understanding. Faith requires surrendering the illusion that we are completely in control. There are moments when God allows certain doors to close, not because He has abandoned you, but because He is redirecting you. Sometimes rejection is not punishment. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes the opportunity you desperately wanted would have kept you from the very thing God was preparing you for. Human beings often judge situations only by immediate comfort. We see an open door and assume it must be God's will. We see a closed door and assume something has gone wrong. But God sees beyond the present moment. He sees the consequences, the hidden dangers, and the greater purpose that is unfolding. Some of you listening may have experienced repeated disappointments. You applied, but you were rejected. You worked hard, but you were overlooked. You prepared yourself, but another person was chosen. Naturally, frustration begins to grow. You start asking, why is this happening to me? But perhaps the deeper question is not, why did this door close? Perhaps the deeper question is, what is God trying to show me through this? Because sometimes God allows human approval to disappear so that we finally seek divine approval. Sometimes He removes our dependence on people so that we rediscover our dependence on Him. The world often measures success by external things. A person is considered successful because of their career, their income, their reputation, or their influence. But God's measurement is different. God looks at faithfulness. God looks at obedience. God looks at the condition of the heart. A person can have a powerful position and still be spiritually empty. A person can have great wealth and still lack peace. A person can receive constant recognition from others and still not know their true identity before God. This is why many people feel restless even when they achieve what they once desired. They finally receive the promotion they worked for, but the satisfaction does not last. They reach the financial goal they created, but another goal immediately appears. They achieve recognition, but they still feel unseen. Why? Because the human soul was not created to be satisfied by temporary things alone. The soul was created for God. No career, no possession, and no earthly achievement can replace the purpose and relationship for which we were created. God is saying, do not reduce your entire existence to survival. You were not created merely to wake up, work, pay bills, and repeat the same cycle until the end of your life. You were created with gifts, responsibilities, and a purpose that reaches beyond yourself. God placed something unique within you. He gave you abilities, ideas, talents, and opportunities to serve Him and others. The tragedy is that many people bury those gifts because they are too afraid to step outside of what feels safe. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom. People say, I cannot do anything different because I need security. But sometimes what we call security is actually a prison. Sometimes the thing we hold on to for protection becomes the very thing preventing growth. The Israelites wanted freedom from slavery, but when freedom became difficult, they looked back toward Egypt because at least Egypt was familiar. Human beings often prefer familiar bondage over unfamiliar freedom. But God does not call His people to remain trapped by fear. He calls them to trust. The question is not whether you will work. The question is whether your work will flow from fear or from purpose. Will you work only because you are afraid of having nothing, or will you work because you understand the gifts and responsibilities God has placed in your hands? There is a profound difference. One mindset says, I must do this because without it I have no value. The other says, I do this because God has given me something to contribute. When God becomes the foundation of your life, you stop seeing yourself as someone begging for permission to exist. You begin to understand that your worth was already given by your Creator. Before any employer knew your name, God knew you. Before any company recognized your ability, God placed those abilities within you. Before any human being opened a door for you, God had already prepared a purpose for your life. This is why the greatest transformation happens when a person stops asking only, what job can I get, and begins asking, what is God asking me to become? Because a job is something you can lose. A position is something that can change. A title is something that can disappear. But the character God builds within you, the wisdom He gives you, and the purpose He establishes cannot be taken away by human decisions. God is not inviting you into irresponsibility. He is inviting you into trust. He is not removing effort from your life. He is removing fear from your heart. He is not telling you to reject honest work. He is telling you not to worship work. There is only one rightful place for ultimate dependence, and that place belongs to God alone. The world says, find your security in what you can control. God says, trust me even when you cannot see the entire path. The world says your value comes from what others are willing to pay you. God says your value comes from the fact that you were created by me. The world says your future depends on who accepts you. God says your future is ultimately held in my hands. And perhaps the reason you feel a deep dissatisfaction is because God is awakening something within you. Perhaps that restlessness is not simply frustration with your circumstances. Perhaps it is an invitation to seek something deeper. Perhaps God is reminding you that you were created for more than simply existing inside a system. You were created to know Him, to serve Him, and to use the gifts He has given you for a purpose greater than yourself. Because when God calls a person, He does not only provide a destination, He provides the strength, wisdom, and grace needed for the journey. The same God who gives the calling also gives the ability to fulfill it. The same God who opens the path also provides what is needed along the way. And this is where true freedom begins. Not when you have everything figured out, but when you finally understand who your true provider is. The greatest struggle many people face is not a lack of opportunity. It is a lack of understanding about where their true dependence should rest. Throughout life, we are constantly encouraged to place our confidence in things that can change. We are told to trust the economy, trust our career, trust our reputation, trust our connections, trust our achievements. But all of these things, while they may have practical value, are still temporary. They are created things, and created things were never meant to carry the weight of our entire existence. Only the Creator can carry that weight. When a person asks a job, a company, or a human authority to provide the security that only God can provide, disappointment is inevitable. Not because work has no value, but because we have placed it in a position it was never meant to occupy. A job can be a blessing, but it was never meant to become your God. A career can be a gift, but it was never meant to become your identity. An opportunity can be valuable, but it was never meant to become the foundation of your hope. The moment these things become the center of our lives, we begin living in fear. We become afraid of losing what we have because we have forgotten who gave it to us in the first place. But when God is truly the center, there is a different kind of confidence. There is a peace that comes from knowing that even if circumstances change, God does not change. Even if people leave, God remains. Even if one path ends, God is still able to create another. This is a truth that many people struggle to accept because they have been conditioned by the world to think only in terms of limitations. They see only one source of income. They see only one opportunity. They see only one possible future. But God is not limited by human imagination. The same God who created the universe out of nothing is not dependent on human systems to accomplish His purposes. If He chooses to provide through a job, He can. If He chooses to provide through another opportunity, He can. If He chooses to open a door that no person expected, He can. The method may change, but the provider remains the same. The danger is that many people spend years chasing what was never meant to satisfy them. They spend their youth, their energy, and their creativity trying to climb ladders that were built by someone else. They measure their success by how far they have advanced according to another person's definition. They sacrifice their peace for promotions. They sacrifice their families for recognition. They sacrifice their gifts because they are afraid to step away from what feels predictable. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. There is a difference between making a living and living with meaning. God did not create you merely to consume resources and complete tasks. He created you with intention. He created you with abilities, responsibilities, and a mission that connects your life to something greater than yourself. When Scripture speaks about gifts, talents, and calling, it is revealing a fundamental truth about human existence. Every person has been entrusted with something. Every person carries something that can be used for good. Some people have the gift of teaching. Some have the gift of creating. Some have the gift of leadership. Some have the gift of serving, encouraging, building, or solving problems. These gifts are not accidents. They are part of the responsibility God has placed within each person. But many people never discover these gifts because they are too busy trying to fit into a mold created by society. They are told, this is the only way to succeed. This is the only path to security. This is the only definition of a meaningful life. And slowly, they stop listening to the deeper questions within their hearts. They stop asking what God has placed inside them. They stop exploring the abilities they were given. They bury their potential beneath fear. Fear is one of the greatest obstacles to fulfilling God's purpose. Fear tells you that you are not ready. Fear tells you that you are not qualified. Fear tells you that you should remain where you are because stepping forward is too risky. But throughout history, God has often called people into situations where they had to depend on Him. He called Moses, who felt inadequate. He called David, who was overlooked by others. He called the disciples, who were ordinary people without worldly status. Again and again, God demonstrated that His power is not limited by human weakness. The question is not whether you feel completely prepared. The question is whether you are willing to trust God enough to begin. Many people wait for perfect conditions before they obey. They say, when I have more money, I will start. When I have more confidence, I will move forward. When everything is guaranteed, I will take action. But faith does not work that way. Faith requires movement even when the entire path is not visible. This does not mean acting recklessly. It does not mean ignoring wisdom, responsibility, or practical realities. God gives us intelligence and expects us to use it. But there is a difference between wisdom and fear. Wisdom seeks God's direction and acts responsibly. Fear refuses to move because it wants complete control. And complete control is something no human being possesses. Many people are exhausted because they are trying to control what only God can control. They believe that if they can secure the perfect job, the perfect income, and the perfect circumstances, they will finally have peace. But peace does not come from perfect circumstances. Peace comes from trusting the one who remains faithful in every circumstance. Consider the life of the saints and the faithful throughout history. Many of them did not have the comfort, security, or recognition that people today often pursue. Yet they possessed something far greater, confidence that God was with them. Their strength did not come from earthly guarantees. Their strength came from knowing that their lives belong to God. This is the mindset God wants to develop within you. He wants you to stop seeing yourself as someone who is constantly waiting for someone else to decide your future. He wants you to understand that your ultimate destiny is not controlled by human approval. People can reject you, but they cannot cancel what God has ordained. People can overlook you, but they cannot erase what God has placed within you. People can close certain doors, but they cannot prevent God from accomplishing His purpose. Sometimes God allows rejection because rejection can redirect you. Sometimes He allows disappointment because disappointment can detach you from false sources of security. Sometimes He allows uncertainty because uncertainty teaches you dependence. We often pray for comfort, but God is more concerned with transformation. We ask Him to make the road easier, but sometimes He uses the difficult road to strengthen our faith. Think about gold. Gold is not purified by avoiding heat. It is purified through the process that removes what does not belong. In the same way, God often uses challenges to remove fear, pride, and misplaced dependence from our lives. He shapes us through experiences that teach us to rely on Him rather than ourselves. The world teaches independence as the highest goal, but spiritual maturity teaches dependence on God. This does not mean becoming passive. It means recognizing that our abilities, opportunities, and successes are ultimately gifts from Him. We work, but God provides. We plan, but God directs. We act, but God sustains. When a person understands this, their relationship with work changes completely. They no longer work because they are terrified of being worthless without a paycheck. They work because they understand that their labor can glorify God. They no longer seek success simply to prove themselves to others. They seek excellence because they want to honor the gifts they have received. This is the difference between a person controlled by fear and a person guided by purpose. One is constantly asking, "What do I need to do to survive?" The other asks, "How can I faithfully use what God has given me?" One is trapped by anxiety. The other is motivated by calling. God is inviting you into this deeper understanding. He is not asking you to ignore responsibility. He is asking you to remove fear from the center of your life. He is asking you to stop believing that your entire future depends on human systems. He is asking you to remember that before you belong to any company, any organization, or any earthly structure, you belong to Him. And when that truth becomes real in your heart, something changes. You stop chasing approval because you already know you are loved by God. You stop living in panic because you know your life is not held together by circumstances alone. You stop measuring yourself only by achievements because you understand your worth comes from something deeper. The greatest freedom is not found in escaping all responsibilities. The greatest freedom is found when your responsibilities are placed under the authority of God. Then work becomes service, talent becomes stewardship, opportunity becomes a blessing, and your entire life becomes an offering. Because the ultimate question is not simply, what job do I have? The deeper question is, am I living according to the purpose God has placed before me? And when you begin seeking that purpose, you begin discovering a reality that the world cannot offer, a life directed not by fear, but by faith, not by desperation, but by trust, not by the limitations of man, but by the wisdom and providence of God. There comes a point in every person's spiritual journey when they must confront a difficult but necessary question. Who truly has authority over my life? Is it God, or is it the fears, expectations, and systems created by the world around me? Many people would immediately answer, of course God has authority over my life. But the evidence of our answer is not found only in our words. It is revealed through our choices, through what we trust, through what we fear losing, and through what we believe we cannot live without. If a person believes that losing a job means losing their identity, then somewhere deep within their heart, that job has become more than a means of work. It has become a source of security, value, and meaning. But no created thing can carry that burden. A position cannot tell you who you are. A paycheck cannot determine your worth. A company cannot define your purpose. Only God has the authority to reveal the true meaning of your life. This is why God often allows moments where human security is shaken. Not because He enjoys seeing people struggle, but because He wants to free them from false foundations. Sometimes we do not realize how much we depend on something until that thing is removed. Sometimes we do not recognize the chains around us until God begins breaking them. A person may think they are free because they have a stable career, a comfortable income, and recognition from others. But if their peace disappears the moment those things are threatened, then they are not truly free. They are dependent on circumstances. True freedom comes when your peace remains, because your confidence is rooted in God rather than in temporary conditions. The world constantly tells people to build their lives around achievement. It says, become successful, become important, become recognized, and then you will have value. But this thinking creates endless anxiety because there is always someone above you, something more to achieve, something more to prove. Even after reaching one goal, another one appears. The finish line keeps moving because the human heart cannot find complete satisfaction in temporary accomplishments. God offers something different. He does not begin with what you can achieve, he begins with who you are. Before you accomplish anything, before anyone recognizes your abilities, before you gain influence or success, God already knows your value. Your worth was established before your first achievement. Your purpose existed before your first opportunity. This is why the person who understands God's providence can face uncertainty differently. They may experience hardship, but they are not destroyed by it. They may face rejection, but they are not defined by it. They may lose something valuable, but they know the one who gave it remains faithful. Look throughout Scripture, and you will see this pattern repeatedly. God often takes people away from what is comfortable before bringing them into what is meaningful. Abraham had to leave what was familiar. Moses had to step away from a hidden life in the wilderness. The disciples had to leave their ordinary routines and follow Christ. Again and again, God called people beyond what they could understand. Why? Because comfort can sometimes prevent growth. Familiarity can sometimes prevent obedience. Security can sometimes prevent faith. When everything depends on what we can see, we never learn to trust what God has promised. Many people today are not lacking ability. They are lacking courage. They have ideas they never pursue. They have talents they never develop. They have opportunities they never explore, because fear convinces them to remain where they are. They say, "What if I fail?" But rarely do they ask the opposite question, "What if God is calling me to something greater?" Fear always focuses on what could go wrong. Faith focuses on who God is. Fear says, "You might lose everything." Faith says, "God is still faithful." Fear says, "You are not enough." Faith says, "God equips those he calls." Fear says, "You need human approval." Faith says, "God's approval is greater than man's acceptance." This transformation in thinking is essential because many people are trapped not by external circumstances but by internal beliefs. They have accepted the idea that they are only as valuable as their position, their income, or their reputation. They have allowed the opinions of others to become louder than the voice of God. But God does not call people based on worldly measurements. He does not choose only those who appear powerful, educated, wealthy, or influential. He often chooses those whom the world overlooks, because this reveals that the strength comes from him. The world looked at David and saw a shepherd boy. God saw a king. The world looked at Moses and saw a man with weaknesses. God saw a leader. The world looked at the disciples and saw ordinary fishermen. God saw messengers who would transform history. This should change the way you see yourself. You may look at your current circumstances and think you have little to offer. You may compare yourself with others and believe your gifts are insignificant. But God does not measure potential the way people do. He does not require you to have everything before he begins working through you. Throughout Scripture, God repeatedly takes what appears small and multiplies it. A small amount of oil becomes enough to sustain a family. A few loaves and fish become food for thousands. A simple shepherd's staff becomes an instrument through which God demonstrates his power. The lesson is not that objects themselves are powerful. The lesson is that God can work through what is surrendered to him. Your abilities, your ideas, your experiences, and your talents may seem ordinary, but when placed in God's hands, they can become instruments of his purpose. This is why you should never despise what God has placed within you. Do not compare your gifts with someone else's gifts. Comparison often causes people to ignore their own calling because they are too focused on another person's assignment. Your responsibility is not to become someone else. Your responsibility is to faithfully become the person God created you to be. There is a reason certain ideas continue returning to your mind. There is a reason certain passions continue stirring within your heart. There is a reason you feel drawn towards certain forms of service, creativity, or contribution. Sometimes those desires are not random. Sometimes they are clues pointing toward the gifts God has entrusted to you. But gifts require responsibility. A talent that is ignored does not grow.
A calling that is constantly postponed does not develop. God gives gifts, but he expects stewardship. He gives opportunities, but he expects faithfulness. Many people pray for God to change their circumstances while refusing to use what he has already placed in their hands.
They ask for a miracle while ignoring the resources already available to them. But often, the beginning of transformation is not receiving something new. It is recognizing and using what God has already given. This is where purpose and provision meet. God does not simply provide resources, he provides assignments. He does not merely give blessings, he gives responsibilities connected to those blessings. The goal is not simply to receive, the goal is to become a faithful steward of what has been entrusted. When your work flows from purpose, it becomes different. You no longer see yourself as merely completing tasks. You understand that your actions can reflect God's goodness. You understand that your abilities are not only for personal advancement, but also for serving others. This is the freedom God desires for you. Not a life without effort, but a life with meaning. Not a life without challenges, but a life with direction. Not a life controlled by fear, but a life guided by trust. The world may tell you that your greatest achievement is finding the right position, but God reminds you that your greatest achievement is becoming the person He created you to be. Because positions change, companies change, economies change, human opinions change, but God's purpose remains. And when you build your life on that truth, you begin walking differently. You stop seeing every rejection as a disaster. You stop seeing every closed door as the end. You begin asking a deeper question. Lord, what are you teaching me through this? Where are you leading me? How can I faithfully follow your direction? That is the mindset of someone who understands divine providence. They do not deny difficulties. They do not pretend challenges do not exist, but they know that difficulties do not have the final word. Because the same God who created the path is also the God who walks with you on the path. And when He calls you forward, He does not abandon you halfway. He strengthens you, He guides you, He provides what is necessary, He gives wisdom when decisions are difficult, He gives courage when fear appears, He gives endurance when the journey becomes demanding. The question is no longer, who will give me an opportunity? The deeper question becomes, how can I faithfully respond to the opportunity God has already placed before me? Because your life was never meant to be defined only by what you receive from others. Your life was created to reveal what God has placed within you. One of the greatest obstacles preventing people from walking in their purpose is the belief that they must wait for someone else to recognize them before they can move forward. Many people spend years hoping for approval, waiting for permission, and seeking validation from people who may never fully understand what God has placed inside them. They look for someone to open a door, someone to provide an opportunity, someone to confirm that they are capable. But God often works differently. He does not always announce His plans through human approval. Sometimes He begins His work in hidden places, in quiet seasons, and in moments when nobody else is watching. Think about how many people in Scripture were prepared in obscurity before they were revealed publicly. David was not discovered while standing on a stage. He was tending sheep. Moses was not prepared in a palace of influence. He spent years in the wilderness. Joseph was not immediately recognized for his purpose. He experienced betrayal, hardship, and imprisonment before stepping into the position God had prepared for him. Their seasons of waiting were not wasted. God was developing character, strengthening faith, and preparing them for what was ahead. Many people become frustrated because they want the promise without the preparation. They want the outcome without the process. They want the blessing without the transformation required to carry it. But God is not only interested in giving you something, He is interested in preparing you to handle what He gives you. Sometimes the closed doors in your life are not signs that God has forgotten you. Sometimes they are signs that God is protecting you from entering something before you are ready. A person may pray for a certain opportunity, but God knows the person they need to become before they can carry that opportunity with wisdom and humility. This is why waiting seasons are so important. Waiting does not mean nothing is happening. A seed planted beneath the soil appears invisible, but underneath the surface, something is growing. In the same way, God often works in areas of our lives that cannot yet be seen. He develops patience, He builds discipline, He removes unhealthy attachments, He teaches dependence. The problem is that human beings often measure progress only by visible results. If there is no promotion, no recognition, no increase, they assume nothing is happening. But God's work is not always visible immediately. The greatest transformations often happen internally before they become visible externally. A person who has learned to trust God during uncertainty possesses something far more valuable than temporary success. They possess stability of soul. They are no longer controlled by every change in circumstances. They no longer collapse when human approval disappears. They understand that their foundation is stronger than anything the world can offer. This is the freedom God wants to bring into your life. He wants to remove the fear that controls your decisions. He wants to free you from constantly asking, "What will people think?" and replace it with the more important question, "What does God desire from me?" Because living for the approval of people is exhausting. Human expectations constantly change. The same people who praise you today may criticize you tomorrow. The same people who celebrate your success may question your decisions when circumstances change. If your identity is built on human opinions, you will always be unstable. But when your identity is rooted in God, you become steady. You can receive praise without becoming proud. You can receive criticism without being destroyed. You can experience success without forgetting where it came from. You can experience failure without believing that your life is over. This is because your value is no longer attached to outcomes. Your value is attached to your relationship with God. This truth also changes how we view provision. Many people think provision only means receiving money or material things, but God's provision is much greater than finances. Sometimes God provides wisdom. Sometimes He provides relationships. Sometimes He provides strength. Sometimes He provides opportunities for growth. Sometimes He provides protection by removing things that would have harmed us. We often ask God for a specific answer, but He sees the entire picture. A child may ask for something that seems good, but a loving parent understands what the child cannot yet understand. In the same way, God's wisdom is greater than our limited perspective. This is why surrender is so important. Surrender does not mean giving up. Surrender means placing your plans under God's direction. It means saying, "Lord, I have desires and dreams, but I trust your wisdom more than my own understanding." When a person reaches this place, they begin experiencing a different kind of confidence. They still work hard. They still pursue excellence. They still make plans, but they are no longer driven by desperation. They are guided by trust. They no longer wake up thinking, "If this one thing does not happen, everything is over." Instead, they understand that God is greater than one opportunity. God is greater than one person's decision. God is greater than one closed door. The world often teaches people to chase security, but God's invitation is to seek Him first. This does not mean ignoring practical responsibilities. It means placing everything in the correct order. When God is first, everything else finds its proper place. A person who seeks only security will eventually discover that nothing in this world is completely secure. But a person who seeks God discovers a foundation that remains even when everything else changes. This is why so many people feel restless in their careers. The issue is not always the job itself. The deeper issue is that they are trying to find eternal meaning in temporary things. They are asking their work to answer questions that only God can answer. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of my life? No employer can answer those questions. No salary can answer those questions. No title can answer those questions. Only God can. And when you understand this, you stop looking at work the same way. Work becomes an expression of purpose rather than a replacement for purpose. Your career becomes something you offer to God rather than something you use to prove yourself to others. This is where true freedom begins. You begin to realize that you are not forgotten because a door closed. You are not rejected because an opportunity passed. You are not insignificant because someone failed to recognize your ability. Your identity was established before anyone else had an opinion about you. God knew you before the world knew you. God saw your potential before anyone else could see your results. God understood the gifts inside you before you ever discovered them yourself. So do not allow temporary rejection to convince you of permanent failure. Do not allow one person's opinion to become louder than God's purpose. Do not allow fear of uncertainty to prevent you from following the path God is leading you toward. Because throughout history, every person who accomplished something meaningful had to face uncertainty. Every person who stepped into a greater purpose had moments where they had to trust beyond what they could see. Faith is not the absence of questions. Faith is trusting God even when all the answers have not appeared yet. And perhaps that is the challenge before you today. Not simply finding another opportunity, not simply searching for another position, but learning to trust God in a deeper way. Maybe God is asking you to examine where your confidence truly comes from. Maybe He is asking you to surrender the fear that has controlled your decisions. Maybe He is asking you to stop seeing yourself only through the limitations of the world and begin seeing yourself through His eyes. Because the person God created you to be is greater than the labels people have placed upon you. You are not merely an employee. 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 You are a person created with dignity, purpose, and responsibility before God. And when you understand that, you begin walking with a different kind of confidence. Not arrogance, not pride, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are guided by something greater than themselves. The world may not always understand your journey. People may question your choices. Some may even criticize your faith. But throughout history, those who followed God often had to walk paths that others could not understand. Noah built when others mocked. Abraham moved when others questioned. The prophets spoke when others rejected them. They did not succeed because they had perfect circumstances. They succeeded because they trusted the one who called them. And that same God is still calling people today. He is calling you to move beyond fear. He is calling you to recognize the gifts He has placed within you. He is calling you to stop measuring your future only by human systems, because your life is not ultimately sustained by a company. Your life is sustained by God. And when you truly understand that, you no longer live as someone desperately searching for approval. You begin living as someone who knows they have already been chosen. The greatest change that can happen in a person's life is not when their circumstances suddenly become easier. It is when their perspective is transformed. When a person begins to see life through the eyes of faith, they no longer measure everything only by what they have, what they lack, or what others think of them. They begin to understand that their life is held by a God who is greater than every circumstance, every limitation, and every uncertainty. For too long, many people have lived under the weight of fear. Fear of losing income, fear of being rejected, fear of not being enough, fear of failing. Fear of stepping away from what is familiar. But fear was never meant to be the foundation of your decisions. God did not create you to live as a prisoner of anxiety, constantly wondering whether you will have enough, whether someone will accept you, or whether your future will collapse if one opportunity disappears. God calls His people to something higher. He calls them to trust. Trust does not mean that there will never be difficulties. Trust does not mean that every day will be comfortable, or that every plan will succeed exactly as expected. Trust means knowing that even in difficult moments, God remains faithful. It means understanding that your life is not controlled only by visible circumstances. There is a greater reality beyond what you can immediately see. The world tells you to place your hope in things that can change. God calls you to place your hope in Him, the one who does not change. This is the difference between living from fear and living from faith. A person controlled by fear constantly asks, "What if something goes wrong?" A person walking in faith asks, "What can God do through this situation?" A fearful person sees closed doors as the end. A faithful person sees closed doors as possible redirection. A fearful person believes rejection means failure. A faithful person understands that sometimes rejection is God's protection, because God sees what you cannot see. There are opportunities you may have wanted that would have taken you away from your true purpose. There are doors you prayed would open that God knew would eventually become a burden. There are situations you considered blessings that God knew would distract you from the path He prepared. Sometimes God's greatest acts of love are hidden behind unanswered prayers. We often want God to explain everything before we obey. We want to know every detail before we take a step. We want certainty before we trust. But God often works through faith. He invites us to move forward while trusting that He will guide the next step when the time comes. Think about Abraham. He was asked to leave what was familiar without knowing every detail of where he was going. Think about Moses. He was asked to return to Egypt despite his fears and weaknesses. Think about Peter. He was asked to step out of the boat onto the water. In every example, the lesson was the same. God's power becomes visible when human beings choose trust over fear. Many people are waiting for everything to be perfect before they begin. They are waiting for more money, more confidence, more resources, more approval. But sometimes the greatest obstacle is not what they lack. It is their unwillingness to trust what God has already placed within them. You may not have everything you want right now, but you may already have what you need to begin. You may not see the entire road, but you may already see the next step. You may not understand the entire plan, but you can still choose obedience. Because God does not always reveal the destination before the journey begins. Often He reveals the path one step at a time. This is why you cannot allow the opinions of others to control your calling. People may only see your present circumstances. They may only see your current position, your past mistakes, or your limitations. But God sees the complete picture. People saw a shepherd. God saw a king. People saw a fisherman. God saw apostles. People saw weakness. God saw potential. Never forget that God's vision for your life is greater than human perception. There are gifts inside you that may have been ignored because you were too focused on fitting into someone else's definition of success. There are abilities you may have neglected because you believed they were not valuable enough. There are dreams you buried because fear convinced you they were impossible. But God does not waste what He creates. The gifts He placed within you have a purpose. The experiences you have gained have meaning. The lessons you have learned can become tools to help others. Your story is not random. Your life is not accidental. God has been working even in seasons you did not understand. The challenge is to stop seeing yourself only through the limitations of the world and begin seeing yourself through the purpose of God. The world asks, "How much can you earn?" God asks, "How faithfully will you use what I have given you?" The world asks, "How important are you in the eyes of others?" God asks, "Are you willing to follow me?" The world asks, "Who will approve you?" God says, "I have already called you." This does not mean that earthly responsibilities disappear. It does not mean that every person must leave their current work or reject employment. God works through many different paths. Some people serve Him through businesses, some serve Him through careers, some serve Him through ordinary, daily responsibilities. The deeper message is this: never allow the things you do to become more important than the one who created you. A job is a tool. It is not your identity. A career is a responsibility. It is not your purpose. Money is a resource. It is not your master. When these things are placed in their proper order, life becomes balanced. You can work without worshiping work. You can pursue success without being controlled by success. You can receive blessings without forgetting the one who provides them. This is the freedom God desires. a freedom where you are no longer controlled by fear of losing what you have, a freedom where you can walk confidently because your foundation is not built on temporary things, a freedom where you know that even if circumstances change, God remains faithful. So if you are in a season of uncertainty today, remember this: a closed door does not mean God has abandoned you. A delay does not mean God has forgotten you. A struggle does not mean God is absent. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. In New York, my dad was a New York City fire chief, and my mom stayed home raising the kids. He is teaching dependence. He is preparing you to carry something greater. Do not allow temporary circumstances to define your eternal purpose. Do not allow rejection from people to convince you that God has rejected you. Do not allow fear of tomorrow to steal the grace God has given you for today. Your future is not ultimately secured by human systems. Your future is secured by the God who created you. The same God who provided yesterday is the God who will provide tomorrow. The same God who guided you through previous seasons is the God who will guide you through the next one. The same God who opened doors before can open doors again. And the same God who sustained others throughout history is still faithful today. So lift your eyes beyond what you can see. Look beyond temporary circumstances. Look beyond human approval. Look beyond the limits of the world. Look toward God. Seek His wisdom. Follow His direction. Use the gifts He has given you. Walk in obedience. Because your life was never meant to be defined only by survival. You were created for purpose. You were created to serve. You were created to reflect God's goodness in the world. You were created to become the person He intended you to be. And when you place your trust completely in Him, something changes inside you. You stop living like someone who is constantly begging for opportunities. You begin living like someone who understands that God is guiding your steps. You stop asking, "Who will choose me?" You begin remembering, God has already chosen me. You stop saying, "What if everything falls apart?" You begin declaring, God remains faithful. You stop allowing fear to control your decisions. You begin allowing faith to guide your actions. This is the freedom that comes from knowing your true source. Not a company, not a position, not a paycheck. God. So today, examine your heart. Where does your trust truly rest? What controls your peace? What defines your identity? Is it something temporary? Or is it the eternal God who created you? Because when God becomes your foundation, no circumstance can completely shake you. When God becomes your source, no human decision can destroy your purpose. When God becomes your guide, you can walk forward even when the path is uncertain. The world may tell you that your future depends on human approval, but God reminds you that your future is held in His hands. The world may tell you that you are limited by your circumstances, but God reminds you that His power is not limited. The world may tell you that you are only what you accomplish, but God reminds you that you are His creation, made with dignity and purpose. So rise with faith, move with courage, trust with confidence. Do not spend your entire life chasing the approval of men while ignoring the calling of God. Do not bury the gifts God has placed within you because fear told you to remain hidden. Do not surrender your purpose for temporary comfort. Seek God first, follow His direction, trust His timing, and remember this truth. The world can change, people can change, opportunities can change, but God remains faithful. If He calls you, He will equip you. If He sends you, He will sustain you. If He gives you a purpose, He will provide what is necessary to fulfill it. Your life is not defined by what doors people open or close. Your life is defined by the God who holds every door in His hands. Walk with Him, Trust him, follow him, and you will discover that true security was never found in a position. It was found in the one who gave you life.